and gentlemen, give a warm applause to Tim Hein.
Honourable Minister, dear industry leaders, dear guests, dear colleagues. It's a great pleasure for me to stand here and welcome you to the 7th Northern Lights Summit, Scaling CCS for the Future. It's a special day. We've reached a milestone. Today we are celebrating that we are ready for CO2. So the first purpose of Northern Lights is to demonstrate that the carbon capture and storage chain is technically feasible. And we're standing here today because the Norwegian state made a bold step to finance this demonstration project, the Longship. Norway recognized that CCS is one of the levers that we have today to kind of put action to climate and to make a real difference. Northern Lights has built 2 first-of-its-kind CO2 ships to transport CO2 to Øygarden. We've built this terminal here in Øygarden. We have a pipeline that's ready, goes out 100 kilometers offshore. We drilled 2 injection wells. We're ready for CO2. We will be transporting CO2 from different sites. We will be storing CO2 captured at Heidelberg. We will capture CO2 at Yara locations, at Ørsted locations, both in Norway, the Netherlands, and Denmark. We've only been able to get this far by building strong partnerships. Together we have been discovering new technologies, new ways of working, and together we are actually creating new solutions. So our second purpose is to expand this demonstration project into a commercial viable business and indeed scale CCS for the future. And here our discovery role continues. We need to really work together. We will only be successful if we build on these partnerships, if we create trusts, and if we build on the shared ambition to move towards a net zero society. Today, success is not only critical for us as Northern Lights and Longship and Norway, but it's also critical for all the other projects that look to us and our partners to see signs that the CCS industry is ready to mature. So today we have an opportunity together to show those signs and express our joint ambitions to make CCS work. So we have a great program lined up. I'm very happy with both you all being here, so thanks, and for kind of the details of the program that we have ahead of us. So before we get into the program, we will have a short video message from Kadri Simpson, who is EU Commissioner for Energy. So welcome to the 2024 Summit.
Hello everybody and greetings from Brussels. Today's launch of the Longship carbon capture and storage facility is a major milestone. It's a pioneering example of technological innovation, but it's also an important moment for Europe's energy transition. The Longship project is the first of its kind. It will help us to capture and securely store millions of tons of CO2. And it's important not just for Norway, but also for the whole of Europe, as we work to decarbonize hard-to-abate industries. Last February, the Commission adopted a communication on industrial carbon management. Its message was clear. Industrial carbon management solutions are part of our fight against climate change, alongside the development of renewables and energy efficiency. These solutions are important for our climate objectives. They can also help EU industries and our economy remain competitive. The Longship breathes life into all this. And I see it inspiring similar projects across Europe for a few different reasons. First, it addresses the challenge of having available operating CO2 storage sites. It establishes a full-scale carbon capture and storage value chain, providing open access transport and storage infrastructure. Second, the facility is an example of successful partnership between industry and public authorities, and it shows that together we can turn ambition into action. Third, Longship is an important first step in a bigger project. The European Commission is proud to support Phase 2 expansion of Northern Lights with 131 million euros in financing through the Connecting Europe facility. Dear friends, this is just the beginning. I have no doubt that your experience will help us further the case of CCS in Europe. We celebrate your impressive work, as well as every single person who made today possible. Congratulations on this great achievement.
Good. I would like to introduce you to Marouk Ali. Marouk is an accomplished journalist, speaker, writer. Marouk has kindly agreed to help us with the program and host the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and it is truly an honor to be able to share the next few hours with all of you here in Øygarden at this very historical event. And as Kadri Simson said, it's a milestone. We will meet in all humbleness world-leading experts, policymakers, who will share valuable insight on how we can scale CCS for the future. So for the next few hours, we will have probably new, fresh ideas end of the day and fruitful discussions. Terje Aasland has served as Minister of Energy since 2022, in a time with global uncertainty with Russia's war. Also in a time where we see the energy security situation has been very critical and where Norway has played a very crucial role. On top of that, we see rapid climate changes. Terje Aasland will speak about why Northern Lights plays such a significant role as we need to now find concrete solutions for climate changes. Thank you.
Dear Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, what a day. I'm so glad to be back here at Øygarden, and what a day to be back. Today's ceremony marks a significant milestone, one that fills us with great pride and hope for the future. This is a proud moment, not just for Northern Lights as a company, but for Norway and for advancement of carbon capture and storage worldwide. On an historic day such as this, we must look at the history. I can't think of any better example of knowledge transfer from the petroleum sector. We have 50 years of knowledge and experience with the reservoir management from oil and gas development on the Norwegian continental shelf. We have more than 27 years of experience from CO2 storage at Sleipner and 16 years from CO2 storage at Snøhvit. And in recent years, we have built up a world-class research environment at TCM. This has brought us to this day, and it's truly something to be proud of. Longship will become the world's first full-scale CCS project with transportation by ship and permanent geological storage of offshore. I'm thrilled that the transport and storage solution, a critical component of this project, is now completed. This is a great achievement, and that certainly deserves a proper celebration. The journey to this point has been anything but easy. A lot of effort and hard work have been invested to make this vision reality. It has been a complex task involving many stakeholders from the beginning of the project to this very day. We have learned a lot. I want to take a moment to acknowledge and give credit to all those who have dedicated years of effort to this project. To those who are working on the ground, thank you very much. I hope to speak to as many of you as I can later today. To Tim Hein, the Managing Director of Northern Lights, who has continued the legacy of Børre Jacobsen. And not least, the Northern Lights project has been masterfully guided to success under the leadership of Sverre Øverå and his exceptional team. Without your commitment, this would not have been possible, and you have every reason to be incredibly proud today. One of Longship's key objectives is to demonstrate to the world that the full-scale CO2 value chain is both possible and safe. This also means that we wanted to create infrastructure that can be utilized by other European countries on a commercial basis. Northern Lights has successfully delivered on this goal. They have secured commercial agreements with Ørsted in Denmark and Yara in Netherlands. I know that the demand is high and will be even higher as we move forward. Europe urgently needs CO2 storage capacity if we are to meet our commitments under the Paris Agreement. That is why we continue to develop our continental shelf storage potential, and why we are actively awarding CO2 exploration license on a commercial basis. In addition to Northern Lights, we have awarded 10 exploration licenses. We are now assessing the applications from the most recent round of applications and looking forward to sharing the result with you. Cross-border CCS projects will be key for scaling up CCS. We reached an important milestone earlier this year. Today is certainly a milestone for phase 1, but it's important that this project does not end here. I expect that the investment decisions for phase 2 will be finalized in the near future, and I will underline the near future. It's really important. By capturing and permanently storing CO2 from hard-to-abate industries, we will not only sustain crucial value creation, but also secure new jobs and develop skill sets for future generations. Next year, we will complete the final piece of this puzzle. Longship will be fully operational with Heidelberg Materials Capture Facility, producing the world's first net zero cement in my home country. I'm so proud. This development gives us a concrete tool to fight climate change, and it's happening right here, right now, in Norway. Once again, I extend my heartfelt congratulations to everyone involved. We are making history, and you should be very proud of what you have accomplished. I look forward to the rest of the day and to meeting more of the remarkable people behind this project. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to Terje Osland. We will have a panel debate in a few minutes' time, but how is all of this possible? Well, the Norwegian Offshore Directorate, they have mapped the subsurface of the Norwegian continental shelf for over 50 years, building knowledge and expertise about the geology that really constitutes the extension of Norway under the sea. To share more on the experience and the expertise with CO2 storage, please welcome Torgeir Stordal.
Minister, Excellencies, dear distinguished guests, good afternoon and many thanks for the opportunity to talk about Europe's CO2 vault here at this milestone event in Øygarden. As the Minister said, at such a milestone, it is prudent to take a brief look back at some of the key events in recent history which has taken Norway to where we are today when it comes to mapping, addressing CCS as a means to reduce emissions. So as many of you will know, and you see on the screen here, our proud oil and gas history was sparked off by the discovery of the giant Ekofisk field in 1969. Already before production started up, our wise politicians agreed the 10 oil commandments. One of these commandments said, flaring of exploitable gas on the NCS must not be accepted except during brief periods of testing. And 20 years later, in 1991, the CO2 tax was introduced. This gave industry an incentive to reduce emissions. In 1996, the Sleipner field started CO2 injection, indeed, for storage purposes. And in 2008, the Snøhvit field started storing CO2. In 2009, the Norwegian Petroleum Directorate at the time initiated studies on the potential CO2 storage on the NCS. And after having issued the North Sea CO2 Atlas in 2011, we published a CO2 atlas for the entire Norwegian continental shelf in 2014. Our work showed that the Norwegian shelf has ample opportunities to store CO2 in many different reservoirs, in many different basins, in all of the ocean areas on the shelf, the North Sea, the Norwegian Sea, and the Barents Sea. And based on the mapping and the modeling work, we had estimated that there is a theoretical potential for safe storage of up to 80 billion tons on the NCS. The Norwegian continental shelf indeed has the potential to become Europe's CO2 vault. And 10 years on, we observe that the Atlas is still being used as a starting point for the companies before they apply for CO2 acreage and storage licenses. Another important milestone was the establishment of Technology Center Mongstad in 2012, where technologies related to industrial-scale CO2 are tested, verified, and demonstrated. And in late 2020, as the Minister said, the Storting approved the financing of the Longship project, and the Northern Lights Plan for Development Operations was approved in 2021. And today we are here gathered to celebrate that Northern Lights is ready to receive CO2 from industrial emitters from both near and further away. The decision to realize Longship and Northern Lights has clearly stimulated the interest for CCS across Europe. It has led many more players to believe that we can make CCS a viable technology and a viable business. As a result, we've seen significantly rising interest for licensing acreage with CO2 storage potential. And so far, we have awarded 11 licenses. 10 of these are exploration licenses. Only Northern Lights have been granted an exploitation license so far. So what might the future bring? Well, first of all, I look forward to seeing this plant in full operation with injecting CO2 in the reservoir. Secondly, of course, we are eagerly awaiting the decision on phase 2. But in parallel, we also expect that the interest for acreage will continue. In the most recent licensing round, we received applications for 3 new areas from 6 companies. And I'm also excited about the next steps in the exploration licenses already awarded. The companies are now busy delivering on the work programs for the exploration period before they have to make a decision to submit a plan for development and operation or drop the license. And part of this work is to develop a viable business model. The first of these decision points will come in 2026. If we sum up the potential injection rate of the exploration licenses awarded so far, there is an expectation that some 40 million tons of CO2 per year could be injected in 2030, with increasing volumes in the following years. So let me conclude. After more than 50 years of petroleum activity, we have a very good and quite detailed understanding of the subsurface on the NCS, and we know there are many suitable reservoirs in which we can safely store CO2. High-quality, modern seismic data and thousands of wells provide the best possible database to support such a new industry. As I've tried to show you, as a nation, we have a proud history over the last few decades with many key milestones to prepare for such an industry. This includes experience from injecting CO2 in Sleipner and Snøhvit. We have a very capable and responsible petroleum industry, where many players, in parallel to maintaining a high oil and gas production, also puts effort into realizing CCS projects. 3 of these companies are in Northern Lights. This demonstrates a willingness to take risks to develop new markets. It also helps to have a predictable regulatory framework and, may I say, strong and capable policymakers and regulators. Last and not least, the willingness of the Norwegian government and parliament to invest so much in Longship and Northern Lights has been vital. Without this investment, we would not have been here today. But this investment was made not only to deliver Europe's first complete value chain for the capture, transport and storage of industrial CO2 emissions, but also to develop a technology that could be crucial in achieving the climate goals. A technology which hopefully can be shared and provide a foundation and inspiration for future projects around the world. Even though there are still obstacles to be overcome, we know that the interest is increasing and there are big efforts put into making CCS a success. Congratulations to Northern Lights and everyone else involved. I look forward to the remarkable day, the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Torgeir Stordal. As we have slightly heard, in 2020, the Norwegian politicians, they backed the implementation of Longship, which is one of the most ambitious CCS initiatives in the world. Longship was made possible through a collaboration between the Norwegian government and private industry. But has this collaboration been without any challenges? And what has also been the key takeaways during these 4 years? Welcome to stage Tina Bru and Terje Aasland. So I want to start with you, Tina Bru, because it was during your time as minister that the Norwegian government decided to launch the Longship project. Can you start off by just bringing us back to the background of why the government at that time decided to do this?
Well, first of all, I'd like to start by saying congratulations to everyone today. What a wonderful day to be here, and I'm so proud to have been a part of it and to be here today and join in the celebration. To try to answer your question, the Norwegian Longship project and the road up to us deciding it was something that we wanted to invest in and to go ahead with was, of course, a long political road. It took many years. There were lots of political discussions, but there has always been, for many, many years, a big agreement also across party lines in Norway that we wanted to do something on CCS. And the main reason for that is that CCS is absolutely crucial if we are to reach our climate targets. There really is no path towards net zero. There is no path to reaching the goals in the Paris Agreement or the commitments in the Paris Agreement without CCS. And in some sectors that are especially hard to abate, it will be impossible to keep those industries going without this solution. So that was the main driver. But of course, to move ahead on such a decision is always risky. You can never know 100% that you're going to succeed. But I feel the work put into this project for over the many years leading up to the decision was so well done. It was so thorough. It was thought through. And it came a time where you just had to say, we are running with this. We believe in this, and we think that it will achieve its goals, and we think that it will make a difference in Europe and hopefully across the world eventually. It's ambitious, yes, but I think being here today, we can already say that we have succeeded on some of the main major milestones.
So given the cost, it's definitely worth it.
I think it's definitely worth it. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. There is no way to actively combat climate change without accepting risk, without accepting that the state has to be involved at some level for the first projects. Because this is, although this is a commercial project, and that was always key for the decision, you have to accept that you need to take down the risk. You need to be on board as authorities to show that you believe in it, and you also have to come up with the first financing for parts of the project. But it's always been key that this was a joint effort between public authorities and business, commercial activity. And I think this shows that it's possible to work in that sense and to be successful doing it. But whether this project will be successful on a global scale, that has to do with if we are to see more projects following the lead of this project. That was always a very big factor, that we wanted to show that it was possible so that we can demonstrate and to have others follow our example.
Terje Aasland, what would you say are the biggest kind of lessons to learn from these 4 years?
I think the biggest lesson is that when we are working together, the government, the industry, we can making a change. That I think is the most important lesson to learn. We can do a lot of things if we are cooperating and having the collaboration between industry and governments. And I have earlier said that every problem that have coming into the Norwegian continental shelf in the oil and gas industry, we have solved it if it are a commercial driver in the end. And when we are talking about new technologies, new opportunities, in the early phase, we have to support it from the government. And I think one of the success factors in Norway is also carbon capture and storage have been a political debate for a really long time. We all remember Jens Stoltenberg talking about the moon landing. It's quite a lot of years ago, but it was the starting of point of Technology Center Mongstad. And then we developed the catching technology. And when we're talking to Heidelberg Materials, it couldn't be real if it don't have been the experience that we have get in the technology center for Mongstad. And then what Tina and the government do in 2020 is really important. And the broad solutions in the parliament, I think that's also really important lesson to learn when you are talking about new technologies, new solutions for the future.
We have briefly touched upon it, but could you elaborate a bit more on what has been kind of the biggest challenges in developing Northern Lights and how concrete have they been addressed?
I think Northern Lights have been, it's 3 parts in the Longship project. And the Northern Lights, I think it have gone quite well. Because of the experience, the competence, and the people who are dedicated to the project. Also, the catching facility in Heidelberg Materials is going quite well. We have some difficulties because of the war and the supply chain to the projects. But I think that the 2 projects have gone quite well. You having to willingness to taking risks when you're going into that kind of projects. And now we see the last night the bystyre, Oslo Council making a decision for Celsio, and the next step in the Longship project is really important. We have a major report during this month, and I think we can end it and fulfill it during this year. And then all the 3 elements in Longship is on place. And it's important also to prove the world that carbon capture and storage is a part of the solutions for the future.
Yeah, because was my next question to you, Tina Bru, that we have a large international audience here today, physically at Øygarden, but we also have a lot of people following us digitally from the whole world. How would you say that Longship and Northern Lights could serve as a model for CCS projects worldwide?
Well, it can definitely serve as a model because it is the first one that actually has developed the whole value chain for this kind of technology. And it shows that you can transport CO2 safely, you can store it safely, and without being able to prove that, which we are doing here today, how is anyone going to believe that it's actually possible? So we're showing that it is possible. And I think the other key thing is that this is a project, the Northern Lights project, it's now delivered on time, to cost, and that in itself is extremely important. Because a lot of the skepticism around CCS has been the fact that the projects are never going to be to the cost that they say they are going to be. It's going to be more expensive. You are not going to be able to deliver what you promised. But I think this shows that you are able to, especially if you have that good partnership between industry and the public sector, you can deliver what you are saying you are going to deliver. And without being able to prove it, to showcase it, how is anyone going to believe it? So for me, that has been the main driver for me when I was minister, and why I really wanted this project to be successful and why I felt safe investing in it, because I just knew that we could prove that this could work. And without proving it, no one's going to believe it.
I think also Northern Lights proved that storage capacity is commercially available with Yara and Ørsted. So the next step is to scale up the project here in Northern Lights, and also using what we just heard about using the storage capacity in the Norwegian continental shelf. It's really important to make it in a commercial way, give this technology to the industry in a commercial situation. It's really important, and I think this is a starting point.
Northern Lights has been extremely expensive. We've heard that already, and required a lot in subsidies. Are projects like these only possible in rich and stable countries like Norway?
I don't think so. I think, like we heard Kadri Simson here earlier today, in the EU as well, there is an enormous effort to support climate technology, to support especially technology that is crucial for industry in sectors that you don't really have any other solutions. Of course, the cheapest way to solve the climate issue is to just produce more renewable power, and that is going to be a major factor. That is probably the most key one. But that will not solve the issue for some sectors that just can't switch to electricity. So without solutions like CCS, if we want to keep industry in Europe, if we want to make sure that we have jobs, that the greener future is a good place to live, then this is the kinds of solutions that we need. There is really no way without. And for Europe as well, who have an ambitious climate policy, who have the ETS system, it's going to be more and more expensive to not handle your emissions. And we are showing today that we can handle them for you. We have lots of capacity. So anyone out there looking who's not from Norway, come here with your CO2. We have lots of room for it.
Great. Thank you very much to Tina Bru and Terje Osland. So we're moving from Norway out to Europe. The European CCS market, it holds immense potential as well. But the path forward, it requires more cooperation, more investment, as we have already heard. So how can we create a European market for CCS across borders? And what is the different status in some countries? To discuss this, we have Anders Hoffmann, Alistair McFarlane, and Beate Baron. So as an opening question, I want to start off by, you represent 3 different countries. And I want to start off by, if you could briefly just say something about the status on CCS in your country. And we'll start with you, Anders Hoffmann.
Well, thank you. Could I start another place, just to sort of congratulate that you actually pulled this off. It's a major success, both for you, but it also makes the rest of us look good. I mean, we've been telling the politicians for years that this is actually possible, and now it's a real proof.
We are very happy to hear it.
And the reason why this is important is that, I mean, commitment to these type of things does not come with a full set of teeth. But every time something actually is real and developed, I mean, the teeth grow and you bite faster. So that's why it's important. Denmark. We've been working very hard since 2020 on developing the market. We have a huge subsidy schemes. Ørsted won the first contract. They will be one of the first to store here, hopefully already next year, full potential in 2026. We have another subsidy scheme opening up in 2 weeks' time. We have license given to storage on land, 3 places. So we are moving fast and trying to catch up to Norway.
Great. Beate Baron, Germany. Earlier this year, Germany announced that they are going to open up for CCS. Just give us the same intro on the status of CCS in Germany.
Yes, and first of all, from my side as well, congratulations. So to the whole team, this is really a big day today, and it's really remarkable. And the view from the German perspective, so we are well aware that we are behind in Germany, but we are catching up, and we do make some progress. We passed in the federal cabinet in Germany in May this year an amendment of our CO2 storage legal act, and this is really essential in Germany because it was a strategic political decision to make clear that we need CCS, CCU to reach our climate goals. These might be obvious to you and maybe to Denmark, but for us and for my minister, for Vice Chancellor Robert Habeck from the Green Party, this was a big step forward. And so we are in the parliamentary procedure, and this is really essential because without legal certainty, there will be no business decision and no business investment. So this is really crucial, and we hope that we can finish the parliamentary procedure by the end of this year, and this would then really be a step forward. We are aware that we are behind, but this is really something that's important for us.
Great. The situation in UK is different.
Yes, so again, my congratulations too. It's actually lovely to come here and see some transportation and storage kit out there. We're not there yet in that stage, but we're very close to granting the first permits, imminent, and I won't define how imminent, to doing that for our 2 major capture projects. And when those 2 projects are up and running in about 3 to 4 years' time, they'll be storing between them 8.5 million tonnes per year, with plans to build up more than that. And we've also got another 21 licenses who are at an earlier stage, and they would be looking to some of them as early as the late this decade, and many more of them phased over the 2030s. So similar capacity in the UK as there is in Norway. I think between our 2 countries we have the most to offer the rest of Europe in terms of the potential for storage, and it's really good that we can work together and collaborate, and we do, which is really good, and learn from one another, because this isn't an industry where anyone is going to get all the answers up front. We do have to share, we do have to make sure that we do things in a way that reduces the risks for this industry and the costs of developing this industry too.
Still, we see that CCS, it's not considered by a legitimate tool by some governments to decarbonize. We also see that a lot is happening in Europe, as all of you have explained. How can we move forward from here when it comes to recognition? Hoffmann.
On recognition, I think the key thing, we had a very similar discussion like that in Denmark, and I think actually my former minister, Dan Jørgensen, who's now hopefully becoming the EU Commissioner on Energy, I mean, the discussion we had with him was simply a numbers game. That, just as mentioned in the previous debate, I mean, if you want to do a reduction of all of the emissions, you need that in the equation. I mean, we can build all the wind and solar, and we're a big fan of that in Denmark, but at some point you need to have something kick in. So I think it's in some ways it's a number thing. You need to, if you look at the numbers and you take climate change really seriously, you need that at some point in the equation. Otherwise, it just doesn't add up.
What do you think, Beate? It's interesting to hear from the German perspective what has really happened when it comes to public perception of CCS.
Yeah, I mean, CCS, CCU is still a very sensitive debate in Germany. That's what we have to admit and what we have to be aware of. We had a discussion 10, 15 years ago, and unfortunately it failed in Germany, we have to admit. And so we go for a stepwise approach. So we say we need this legal clarity, we open to offshore storage, we do not open yet for onshore storage, so we have opt-in versions on onshore, but we need a stepwise approach in Germany to come up with something. Otherwise, I think it's difficult. And to receive recognition, we need examples, and we need positive examples like the one we can see here. And we need to show in Germany that we play within a European and maybe even an international concert, so that there are countries showing that it's possible, it's not rocket science, it's there, it's real, and that's important.
Alistair?
Yeah, I agree. I think visible example, showing it working's a great way to do that. Likewise, in the UK, we only allow offshore storage, so that's part of the way of getting people comfortable with it. We've had a recent change of government, and our new government has the same commitment as our previous one. So at least there's that political certainty going forward, which is really good. I think for the average person in the street, I don't know if it's the same in other countries, but the average person in the street in the UK, they don't know anything about this. They're not tuned into it. They care about their bills. They care about the cost of things. So I think that's the way that we can also help, is to do this in a way that doesn't result in lots of money being wasted and is as efficient as possible. And people can actually see that impact in what they pay for things, goods, services, and power.
So it's about establishing and giving people knowledge about basically what CCS is, but also the question about security. I guess that has been an issue in Germany in particular.
Yes, definitely. So we have to show that it's safe, and therefore we need projects. And Norway can show this, and other countries, and Denmark, they can show that it's safe and that's really not rocket science, but it's possible. But we have to be very clear on that, and we have to provide really profound information. That's, I think, is crucial, and we have to be an honest debate. And then I think it's feasible and it's possible, but it's a process.
It's a process. And what do you see, what are kind of the main challenges in establishing a cross-border CCS market in Europe today? And how can they be addressed?
In 2 minutes?
Yeah.
Good. I think 3 points. I think what we try to do in Denmark is really to go with all the policy we have to remember this is a market. I mean, we need to develop a market. Yes, as you said early on, this is expensive in the beginning, so you need to have public subsidies, you need to increase carbon taxes, you need to have quotas that work. But in all of these policies, you need to push it towards a market where it's industry that do contracts and actually make the market work. So I think that's first, we have to remember that. Secondly, the problem with this market is that it's really a long value chain. You have capture, you have transport, and you have storage. And in some way you can see that, I mean, we have this perfect facilities, but I mean, we kind of lack some capture. So this timing, I mean, how do you get the value chain to be ready at the same time? And I think in that way we can really help each other in Europe, because I mean, all of us have different policies with different, I mean, some of us have in 2028, some have 2030. So this, I mean, how do you align the development of the value chain so it's sort of ready at the same time? I think that would be the second. Really remember, it's a value chain, it has to be ready at the same time. And then I think thirdly, I think our concern now is really that we have great storage project in Europe. We will have even more now with the EU regulation. We have quite a lot of projects that are actually capturing. I mean, we do see that, especially with the funding from the Innovation Fund, but we still lack sort of regulation on transport. So I mean, if you want to have a CO2 pipeline, I mean, what's the regulation on that? So really try to make sure that we have institutional regulatory frameworks for all of the parts of the value chain to be ready at the same time. And I think transport, if somebody want to know about what Denmark thinks about transport and the EU Commission,
you can talk to Anders in the break.
I have a paper, but I think that's actually really the next step, I think, where the Commission could do something really nice to really say, we want to develop this framework for how to regulate the transportation and do it in a way which is really market-based. I think, remember, it's a market, and it's a value chain.
And on this, I want to hear your perspective as well, Alistair. What regulations do we need in Europe?
Yeah, so I'll step back a little bit. NSTA, we're an arm's length government body, so we don't set policy on how to move CO2 around. We're much more focused on the licensing and permitting of the actual projects. Yeah, from a mechanical making things easy, I think consistency on the way we do things across all the countries is quite important. So we're already having conversations about inspection regimes and that kind of thing between our different countries. I think if you're an operator and an operator in the UK, an operator in Norway or elsewhere, knowing that things are done in pretty much the same way is quite good, because it's complicated enough with the number of regulators in the UK that are involved. I think it's probably the most complicated place to do business a little bit. So I think we can do that. We can try and stay consistent in our guidelines. So I don't know, we are quite consistent just now. The UK guidelines, although they were a lift and shift of the EU guidelines, they haven't really changed an awful lot. And it's about trying to stay lockstep with that. And then we just need to look at the bigger prize and forget about the challenges of our individual countries, but look at the bigger prize of reducing CO2 for the world and try to work towards delivering on that. And that's one I'll leave to the politicians to deal with. But it's we're in a great place. It's a great opportunity, and it's not often you get the chance to kick off a new industry like this and to build it in a way where you've almost got a blank sheet of paper. So it's about filling in those sheets of paper in the most consistent fashion we can across all those countries that can provide a service to each other and support each other.
How do you see it, Beate?
I would agree with both of you and Anders, what you said. It needs to be a market-based approach. This does not exclude that there need to be financial incentives. And we in Germany, we want to have projects on CCS, CCU, and we want to finance it through carbon contracts for difference, so a project-based approach. And we should not over-regulate it. And this is a message to Europe and to the European Union maybe as well. But on the other hand, of course, we do need Europe and we do need European approach, especially on standards. So standardization is very crucial. Issues on purity and other issues, therefore we need common standards, and this as well can help to show that it's safe and that there are clear standards. That's my second point. And the third point is infrastructure. Of course, infrastructure is crucial, and there we have cross-border elements in there. And here I do think we need cross-border guidelines from the European Commission, and we need to talk about financing instruments on cross-border infrastructure.
In a global perspective, US is leading on CCS. What lessons can be learned from? What lessons can Europe learn from the US when it comes to financing, especially?
Good question. I think what we tried to sort of pull out of the US case was more the market-based. Mm-hmm. And I think also this idea that you also need to have regulation which would allow the market to develop. I think that has really been the key, and not so much on the financing part. I think we're quite, so far, still quite pleased with our subsidy schemes, the way we have structured them. So, but combined with, of course, that in some way it need to be taxes that are driving them. But really this idea that you need to develop the market. I think that has been the key takeaway from us, from the US and Canadian.
Any short comments from any of you on this?
Yeah, I think they're maybe leading with their IRA Act, but in actual physical projects and sanctions being taken, not so much, I don't think. And it'll be interesting to see how things pan out. I do think Europe will end up playing a leading role with actual visible, high industrial scale storage, probably before America, to be honest.
Thank you so much to all of you. So our next speaker is Claire Curry. She is head of technology and industry at Bloomberg NEF. That is a provider of forward-thinking research and analysis on trends driving the transition to a lower carbon economy. She would talk about the current market status and also what the pipeline looks like globally and within Europe to 2035.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. So my job is to show you lots of numbers, but they are in the context of pretty charts, so please don't panic. And I'm very happy to share with any of you some of this data afterwards if it's useful and interesting. As Maruk said, my goal is to talk a bit about the context. So I'll talk quite a bit about where the EU and the UK and the world is with regards to announced capacity. I'll talk a bit about policy and the setting of the scene. Obviously, we're doing this because we want to reach net zero emissions, or as close as possible to net zero as we can. So I want to start actually with that. And a bit of modeling that my teams have been doing at BNEF, looking at how we get to net zero and where CCS sits. So the work we've been doing recently is looking at what the transition looks like from an economics perspective. I'll explain the chart. I know it's a lot of color. If we continue today with the transition, and we basically assumed that we stop developing technology, costs stop falling for solar, wind, storage, etc., then we will continue to emit CO2, and that's the top dash line. But that's not going to happen. Actually, our modeling, we believe that we have reached peak CO2 emissions globally, and that because we are seeing improvements in solar, wind, storage, electric vehicles, we will now see a dip in CO2 emissions, just based on economics, no policy driven, no net zero goals driven, which is exciting. Unfortunately, it's not enough, right? You can see there that the main drivers here of the economic transition is renewables and electrification of passenger vehicles. And that gets us to raising temperatures by 2.6 degrees by 2050, which is warm and not acceptable. If we try and push emissions down to net zero by 2050, you see two things. One, that is a lot of work to do. Two, lots more colors, right, on this chart. And that is because we begin to see through policy and corporate action and consumer action the evolving of clean molecules, particularly. Still lots of clean power, as you can see in the blue, but also hydrogen, obviously bioenergy, and plenty of CCS there, and that's this teal color at the bottom you can see. And if I break that out more specifically, you can see the role CCS plays, or just carbon capture here plays. If we're to get to net zero by 2050, we think in our modeling we cannot actually get below a 1.75 degrees of warming. Without the carbon capture part, we get to 1.9 degrees of warming. I know there's a lot of numbers, it's quite abstract, but that is a hugely significant chunk that carbon capture is playing here. And I think for many of you who've been in this sector a long time, even 5 years ago, many countries in Europe would not have admitted that carbon capture will play as important a role. So I think we're in a place now of consensus. The previous panel said that really well, and the route we need to take and why CCS is so important. If you break it down, this is obviously a global picture. This is the growth in CCS by capture, point source capture type. A lot of blue, right? And that's power. That's not really a Europe story. Our modeling shows a huge amount of new fossil fuel plants being built in Asia in the next decade, and they will all need carbon capture abatement if we are to reach net zero. But you still see plenty of industry here too, so it's not just a power story. And actually, if you break it down by sector instead, on the right-hand side, you see a different story, right? There's a lot of abatement with power, but actually most net zero power is a clean energy story, hence why there's loads of blue there on the power part. Where you see CCS making the most important strides is going to be in steel, cement, chemicals, aluminium. And that's definitely, I think, where Europe and the EU sees the majority of their CCS going. Now, this looks like a huge amount. This is 8 gigatons of CO2 capture we need by 2050. It's not so awful in Europe. We need less, which is good. If you look at EMEA as a region, so Europe, Middle East, and Africa, we need about 1.2 gigatons. Still a lot, but less than 8. And actually, the EU itself, we think, needs 410 million metric tons. So it's not quite as large as that total 8 gigatons, but obviously huge still compared to where we are today. So that's kind of where we need to get to if we're serious about keeping temperature rise below 2 degrees Celsius by 2050. Where are we today? Well, this is the data we've been tracking on announced capacity. So you can see here on the left-hand side, we have about just below, well, about 50 million metric tons of carbon capture capacity globally. Most of that is in the US, and it's mostly to capture very high concentration CO2 from natural gas processing. But you can see on the right, we're hoping to get to 424 million metric tons. That's the announced capacity globally. You can see there it's really a US, UK, Canada, and then certain European country story, so definitely not an Asia story yet. If you break it down by market, I know this is maybe, I hope you can see this, but basically it's a bit of a mixed bag. In a good way, we're seeing a lot of new sectors wanting to apply carbon capture that haven't yet done that before. So we're seeing lots in hydrogen, power, cement, ethanol, among other things, which is exciting. If you look at Europe, this is European announced capacity. So it's 55 million metric tons announced in the EU. This is well, Europe ex-UK. The UK, on top, has announced 70 million metric tons of capture. So that's about 125 million metric tons across the European continent. And you can see here that some of the big hubs that are moving fast in France and the Netherlands, definitely kind of outweighing the rest of the activity. And you see on the left-hand side there, really it's been a Norway story to date, obviously, with the 2 big CCS projects in Norway. So, where is this all going to go? Well, to date, most CO2 that's been captured is used in enhanced oil recovery. It's not a permanent storage solution. But what we are seeing is the majority of announced projects globally want to geologically permanently store that CO2, particularly on the right-hand side when you look at what the UK, the EU, and the US want to do. So I want to spend the rest of my time talking about how we might get CCS both on track and actually get those projects built that have been announced, which will require a lot of money, and then how we get the announced capacity to multiply to get to that volume we really need to reach net zero emissions. And I want to use a framework that I think is the way that renewables and battery electric vehicles have scaled and could be a good, useful, simplified way to scale CCS. What has happened in renewables and battery electric vehicles is we identified the technologies that made sense to decarbonize those sectors, and we scaled those technologies. When that happens, policy steps in. Policy can't work in a technology vacuum where there's no obvious route to decarbonization, but policy works very well when it doesn't need to randomly pick technology winners and just knows what the route is. Once policy moves in, we then begin to see corporate action. Without corporates announcing net zero goals and announcing to build projects, obviously, we don't get any action. And then finance comes. Obviously, government finance is important, but we need private capital. We need equity and debt for project finance and corporate finance to be able to scale this sector, even while it's supported by government. So where are we with CCS? Well, I've tentatively put this in green, the technology. I think although it's an old sector that's been doing capture of natural gas processing for a while, it's new to thinking about other types of lower CO2 concentration sources, like in cement and steel, but we are getting there. I think this chart here reflects the increasing diversity in technology adoption. This shows announced capacity by 2035 and the technologies these projects are saying they want to use. The purple is basically liquid amine absorption, so that's conventional mainstream carbon capture technology that works. But we are beginning to see, for things like cement, concrete, and for things like direct air capture as well, new technologies evolving. And I think maybe tentatively green light on the technology side. We know we can do this. It's now about reducing costs, reducing toxicity, reducing energy use. Policy, I think even 5 years ago, this wouldn't have been amber. This probably would have been red, particularly in Europe. But we are now beginning to see, as we've mentioned today, some pretty clear policy directions and the beginning of actual financial support. So in the EU, I'll just talk about the EU specifically, we have seen through the Net Zero Industry Act and through the Europe's Industrial Carbon Management Strategy, a pretty clear path and signal of where we need to get to. And actually the EU has announced it wants 450 million metric tons of capture by 2050. That's more than BNEF's modeling says is even necessary for the EU to reach net zero, so it's a very ambitious goal. The good news is that comes with plenty of storage goals as well for the EU. And this is obviously, this comes with this announcement comes as just a strategy. It's not got any kind of mandates behind it, but I think it's important to show that that direction is happening and that there's this plan. With that, we then need carrots and sticks. The EU has a great big stick, and it's called the EU ETS, and involving a carbon pricing scheme. As you probably know, most heavy industry has been exempt from the EU ETS, but that is changing. This chart shows the phase out of free allocations, and it means that for cement and metals, particularly, and oil refining, they will begin paying a pretty hefty carbon price. Our forecast for the carbon price is it will reach about, well, this says 140 euros a ton. That's in 2022 euros. It'll actually reach, we think, about 190 euros a ton by 2035. And that means that if you are making a ton of steel or a ton of cement in the EU, you'll be paying about 130 euros of carbon on top of that ton to make, which makes carbon capture suddenly look quite interesting. This chart shows the cost of making a ton of steel in the EU in 2030. That is very soon. And you can see here the most expensive way of making that steel is through building a brand new coal or gas-powered steel mill. In fact, the cheapest way we think of making a ton of primary steel in the EU because of the carbon price will be through CCS. Which is interesting. I mean, there still needs to be obviously support to help those companies do this and still make some sort of return and profit. And obviously CBAM will be helpful here. But the fact is that this is a very big stick, and it will start biting in the next 5 years. We then need is the carrots. The EU has a few carrots. One is the Innovation Fund, which is the fund that uses all of that carbon price money to then reinvest in industry. 4 billion euros has been spent so far by the fund, 2 billion of that in CCS. So it is a really big focus of the EU Innovation Fund. And we think the Innovation Fund will scale to a 44 billion euro fund this decade. Overall, Europe, including the UK, has pledged or spent 43 billion euros to date on CCS, which is actually a huge amount. I mean, half of that, at least, is the UK, but definitely nations in Europe, including Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, France, are beginning to spend money or set policies around CCS. So if we think that actually policy is potentially going from kind of an amber traffic light to a green one, what's next? Well, next is corporate action. We obviously need to see more announcements of carbon capture and more kind of pledges to build it. Now, 3 years ago, we had a look at all industrial manufacturing capacity globally and tried to work out how much of that capacity was under a net zero goal. And it didn't look great. Right? This is actually quite recent, 2021, and most of these coloured bars is probably for European capacity. We redid this work about 3 months ago, and we saw quite a different story. We're now seeing the majority of global petchems, steel, aluminium, and half the world's cement with a net zero goal, which is very impressive considering a lot of this is in China. This, obviously, it's just goals. It doesn't mean anything necessarily, but I think a net zero goal is an indication that these companies are beginning to see policy bite, and they're beginning to see customers want this stuff. A big change in Europe in the last few years is that customers begin to want green products and are willing to pay a premium for them. We've now tracked 112 offtakes for low-carbon steel globally. Many of the companies on this chart are European companies who want to build net zero cars in Germany with green steel, or net zero radiators, or net zero air conditioning units, or net zero warehouse racks like IKEA is building in Sweden. So there's a lot of exciting stuff going on here, and a lot of this will be supported by CCS. So, to end, the final piece of the puzzle is financing. And we have seen in renewables and battery electric vehicles that when the other three pieces are there, we see private finance flow. But it has to make, obviously, economic sense. These projects have to be bankable. And we're not there yet with CCS. But I'll show you kind of where progress has been made. First up, this is the amount of money we've been seeing flowing into the project finance side of CCS. Good news, last year was a record year. Projects raised $11.3 billion. That's double the year before. So lots of movement. And that's exciting. It means lots of projects reaching financial or final investment decision across a lot of different sectors here, including transport and storage and various capture options. Breaking it down by region, it's true to say that the EU is ahead when it comes to finance, not announced capacity, but what's actually getting financed. The EU took a big chunk of that money from last year. What's less good is this tiny bar here you can see, which is Q1 this year. We only saw $300 million go towards financing CCS in Q1 this year, much less than last year. It is true to say that this year has not been a great year for final investment decisions for CCS projects. We've actually seen only a basically net zero new capacity announced for CCS in the last 9 months, if you add up the council projects and the new announced projects. The other bad news is this $11 billion sounds like a lot, but it's tiny in comparison to what the world is spending on the transition more broadly. We've seen $1.8 trillion spent on the transition, but it's mostly renewables in blue and battery electric vehicles in green. The CCS color is in teal, but you can hardly see it. It's so tiny. And this 1.8 trillion sounds like a lot, again, but actually we need to be spending $5.4 trillion every year this decade, and $8 trillion every year next decade on the transition as a whole to get on track for that net zero scenario I showed you in my second slide. This same data in a table format, just to pull out CCS, brings it even more starkly, I think, into reality. We should be spending $510 billion a year on CCS project finance this year and every year this decade to get on track. So CCS is almost the furthest behind sector that we're looking at when it comes to the transition. I'm going to stop there and pass on to the next panel, which I'm hoping will lead quite nicely into this discussion around financing and how we tackle it and get that final piece of the puzzle sorted. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much to Claire Curry. Now we are going to hear from key industrial actors within the cement industry, and also what lessons they have learned so far working with CCS technology, what needs to be done going forward. We will also hear what needs to be done to commercialize CCS and what barriers remain for the technology. So welcome on stage Giv Brantenberg, Morgan Malakoff, and Seb Hembest. Welcome. I want to start with you, Giv. Heidelberg is one of the 3 industrial partners involved in Northern Lights project. What role does Heidelberg play in the project, and also what considerations were made?
Okay. First of all, Tim, congratulations. Okay, big day for you, big day for the value chain of which we're a part of. Normally, when I'm brought out of my office, it's to explain to a customer why something went wrong or to try to land a large deal. And today, I'm here as a customer. You know, that's refreshing for me, to put it that way. The two of us, the 2 largest global companies in cement. Okay, so I think you've rounded up the set of good prospective customers here. Yeah? We represent 7% of the global emissions, the cement industry. Okay, so that's where we come from, and at the same time, it's hard to abate. Hard to abate because 2/3 of our emissions come from the raw materials. Very little to do about it. Okay. Now, have we done everything we can before coming, to pulling on this big lever of carbon capture? Yes, of course. I mean, we've been working, since the 70s on all traditional levers. What have you? Alternative raw materials, alternative fuels, secondary cementitious materials such as fly ash and slag, for instance, energy efficiency, all that has been done. So back in 2005, some of our senior managers sat in Brevik and tried to look a bit ahead and said, where are we going with all this? These were involved, in designing all these levers on CO2 abatement. And they said, well, why don't we try to capture the damn thing? And I heard that somebody said that this is not really rocket science. Trust me that in 2005 in the cement industry, carbon capture was really rocket science. This was a kind of career-ending kind of nonsense that you could, don't tell it to upper management, keep it indoors, Now, with great support from government over a period of almost 20 years, we have to say, I mean, through various stages of development, we came in September 2020 and was selected as the partner to be capturing CO2 in Northern Lights. Super proud of that. Okay. Now, what was our unique selling point? We were up against, Celsio, Waste to Energy in Oslo, and we said, well, listen, we're the largest player in Europe. Okay, most of our plants have great export capacity. They're close to shore. Okay, so it was all about replicability. Is this going to be the only project? And we said, no, hang on. And I think we proved that because only 6 months into the build of our Brevik plant in south of Norway, we announced that we're going to build, our second carbon capture facility in Northern Europe, on the island of Gotland, on a plant which at the time was the largest cement plant in Europe. Okay, so this is to capture 1.8 million tons, and it's really, now we're talking of scale. Brevik is 400,000 tons on a demonstration project as such, but still large industrial scale. Now. And then we signed up an MOU with, I'm sure we have colleagues here from Equinor. We signed an MOU back in 2019. We had a big CO2 conference in Oslo. And we basically committed ourselves to start looking at other plants than just Brevik to make sure that we're actually maturing other projects. And Sleat is only one of them. And today we have a dozen projects around the world on different technologies. So I think, yes, we play a role in this value chain, and we have other projects also coming online. Yeah.
Great. Morgan, as one of the largest CO2 emitters in Europe, could you take us through what is your Holcim's status with CCS as now?
I think Giv said a lot already about the industry, so I try to comment a little bit more, but thank you very much for the invitation. I think it's indeed very good to invite customers. You need someone to pay the bill for all these beautiful infrastructures. So indeed, the cement industry is a big, large to abate industry. 7-8% of the global emission of CO2 is coming from our industry, so we have a role to play. And the Holcim Group is, of course, fully committed to decarbonize its business, to decarbonize the industry. And indeed, it's not only about carbon capture. Before we capture the carbon, we have to work on our raw materials, we work on alternative fuels, we work on green energy, but still you have a big part of CO2. There is no other option today than the CCS if you want to be net zero. So at Holcim in Europe, we are committed to capture 5 million tons of CO2 before 2030, which represent a bit more than 8 million tons of cement. We want to supply to the market as green cement. That's the commitment we have to the market. So I'm representing Belgium because we have a big project in Belgium named Go4Zero, where we are going to build the first net zero cement plant in Belgium, where we are going to capture 1.1 million tons of CO2. We need to transport, and we need to find a solution in order to sequestrate.
And we'll come back to Belgium as well, but I also want to introduce you to the panel, Seb Hembest. We heard a lot about financing, which is the key. What can you tell us, what is the status of CCS in an international bank as you represent?
Well, I think the headline answer is, I think that sentiment around CCS has probably never been stronger. And this project, the progress it's made, could play a further catalyzing effect on that. First let me say that when you look around international banks, almost all of them have set big net zero goals. And for a bank, to achieve that, we've got to decarbonize our scope 3s. So in many ways, we're not so dissimilar from other parts of the sort of legacy economy where it's a use of product challenge. And so, we published in January a net zero transition plan, quite long, but in the middle of it is a sector-by-sector decarbonisation pathway analysis that sort of is our understanding of how this needs to be done. And of course, as we've heard, there's a hell of a lot of this is going to get done with clean electrons, but there's a portion that requires a clean molecule or a molecule that utilizes carbon captured storage and utilization technology. And so it's really critical to how you get there. And I think that banks understand that, and it's part of their plans. And the only way we can achieve what we've set out to achieve is by supporting our customers to reduce their emissions. So one thing my team does is goes around to all our major emitting customers and understand their strategies for tackling this and think about how the bank can help. And so we've been really active in CCS. I mean, not in this project, obviously, because there's been no direct project finance coming into it, but we have been active in the UK and around the EU on project finance. We provide working capital loans for CCS. We've done a green bond. We've done a bunch of venture debt and some equity raises. And actually, when we think about the types of capital, we're supporting not just projects, but also companies. And there's a load of innovative companies that are bringing new technologies to market that could help to bring those costs down and to achieve the sort of numbers that Claire had on her slides before. And we put in, it was September last year, we announced a special climate tech facility of $1 billion as part of our overall commitment of $750 billion to $1 trillion for sustainable finance, targeting clean tech companies with venture debt, so early stage, high risk debt. And we also acquired, and those of you from the UK might remember this, it was a big deal at the time, last year, Silicon Valley Bank UK for £1, which was, we think, a good deal, and set up HSBC Innovation Banking. So from the earliest stage companies to the biggest ones, we are very much keen to try and fill that gap that Claire had on the screen for finance. But sentiment's never been better, I think, for this industry. And that's because we now have a clear CCS for what story that is better than it was before. Originally, CCS is we've been tracking the market for a long time in energy transition, was about power generation. And it was always going to get beaten by the modular technologies of wind and PV from a bulk electricity provision perspective. But now we're saying CCS for what? CCS for hard to abate, CCS for seasonal power, CCS for something that has high value in the system, and high value in the system means a high willingness to pay, which means just because it's expensive today doesn't mean it's not the best technology option or one of the suite of best technology options for dealing with that. Technology costs are coming down fast, and you combine that with new innovation in business models, new innovation in the service companies we're now seeing who specialize in this. I think the direction of travel is really, really positive, and the finance industry is tracking that and is there when the project economics add up.
To you, Giv and Morgan, how long do you expect government to subsidize the industry? Because the key question is, how do we commercialize it?
Let me try that.
Is there a timeline?
Well, I won't say any timeline, but it was very refreshing to have Claire go in front of us, and she basically gave you the answer. Yeah, the equation is really not that difficult. On one end, you have CO2 cost avoidance, and then you have a product, and obviously you want to have a new price point on this new product, and in between you have the cost of running these various technologies. Okay, so you were showing that the cost of CO2 is going to increase significantly. There are mechanisms in place already, the phasing out of ETS, the introduction of CBAM, carbon border adjustment mechanisms coming in. Already by 2030, there'll be a discount of 47.5% on the free allocation. So obviously it's going to be super expensive not to do something about your emissions, okay? And we see actually that in years to come, there will be a consolidation of the industry in Europe in particular, where you will have to basically concentrate your manufacturing on the more efficient plants. We've already done that in Northern Europe, in our region. We're 6 plants. We closed down 1 in Sweden and 1 in Estonia and consolidated everything there. So we believe in this business model that, you need financing to begin with, because imagine the Brevik project. It's not commercially viable yet, okay? But the concept as such is definitely viable in the long run, yeah? There's no doubt. But you need to take a chance and make sure that you don't have a first mover disadvantage. And that's where, the role of a government comes in, to make sure that we actually take that leap, because it is for us a bit of a leap, yeah?
Morgan, you spoke about Belgium. And would you say that there is a different approach to CCS in Belgium?
So we follow the EU framework, right, for CCS. But what Giv said I think is very important. I think the CO2 cost you mentioned at 110 euros by 2030 is not enough, right, to finance this value chain. And the main issue we face today is the de-risking of this value chain. Because we are talking about contracts we are going to sign with you guys, but with transportation, with the terminal, 10, 15 years contract where we have to engage a company with a huge impact on our balance sheet. So the liability we put in these value chains as an emitter is huge. And at the end of the day, if something is going wrong, if you have a technical issue or anything is falling on our shoulders, because we have the CO2 credits, right? So we need to find de-risking mechanism in order to secure the investments of large to abate industries like us. And this is, for me, one of the key challenges we have to work on, and it's coming with the public authorities, with the contract for difference, for instance, with funding, but we have to make it simple. When we compare the way we have funding in US and here in Europe, the complexity to get the funding is huge in Europe, and it takes hell of time, right? We need to be faster, and we need to go much simpler in the process. Maybe and just to finish, and we discuss about alignment of the FIDs of the industry. The investment decision, alignment of the investment decision is key. What we see today for early movers like us, because we will be ready by 2029, we see the value chain is not ready. So we need to continue to work together, and I would like to thank you, Tim. Since you joined, we have very good collaboration to find a way to align our agenda, but also with Air Liquide in the room or other players in the value chain. It's important that we keep talking on a very regular basis to make sure we align our investment decisions in order to be ready on time. And that is, for me, one of the key risks we have in our projects is, that we are not fully aligned, right? And to finish, I'm sorry, last point, which is very important also for us, is the cost competitiveness. We have to make sure that this value chain is competitive, because in the cement industry, we see our colleagues from North Africa being more and more active on the carbon capture. They will go to the market also. They can come to the market with decarbonized cements. So we need to be cost competitive, because otherwise no one will accept to pay the cement at the price we can see now with the cost of the CCS value chain. So everyone has to be transparent on the cost of the value chain. Otherwise, that will never work. I think it's a key message we have here.
Any last-minute remarks from you, Seb?
Sorry.
I just think that this question of getting private capital into CCS just requires this alignment, and it requires the de-risking, and the role of government's absolutely key. And where we've been able to do most is in the UK, because of the way in which those projects are de-risked, the combination of how the emitters are paid, how storage and transport is paid, and how the government sits behind it. Because unfortunately, finance is not going to altruistically, it's got a very limited appetite for altruistic investment or altruistic finance. Because it has shareholders, and the shareholders ultimately will mean the CEO doesn't last very long if they don't do this. So the reality of business is there for everyone, and for finance, that de-risking is critical. And the more we can get that right, I think the more that private capital can crowd in.
Thank you very much to all of you. We can continue the discussion because now we will have a brief break. There will be some small refreshments, and we'll continue with the second part of the summit at 2:20. So see you soon. So, welcome back, everyone. We are now continuing with the second part of the summit. We still have a very packed hour ahead of us. Our next speaker is Édouard Pernaut. He is Secretary General at the Zero Emissions Platform, which is an organization dedicated to providing expertise on carbon capture. He will talk about why reducing emissions isn't enough, and also why we need permanent carbon removals. Then he will also touch upon the need for good infrastructure and what policies we need to develop technologies for the future. So welcome to Pernaut.
Thank you very much, everybody. It's great to be in Norway, and I have two fantastic reasons as to why I love being here. Firstly, because you guys have weirder names than mine, so I feel a little bit less bad about it. And secondly, because you guys love carbon capture, and I love carbon capture. I am not here, though, to talk about CCS, per se. I'm here to talk about carbon removals. But firstly, I'd like to give a quick overview of Zero Emissions Platform, because I'm sure you're wondering who we are and what we do. So in essence, Zero Emissions Platform is the advisor to the European Union on industrial carbon management. We represent all the value chain. We have companies, including Northern Lights, who are among our members. But we're also including NGOs. I myself come from an environmental NGO background, as well as trade unions, scientific institutes. And so our goal really is to help policymakers make better decisions. So when we're thinking about carbon removals in particular, it's quite a difficult thing to understand. And in particular, trying to make policymakers understand how we should go about deploying these solutions, I try to make it as basic as possible. So in doing so, I go about what I normally do. Much like Alistair described earlier, no one really knows anything about CCS. So I usually do what all good men do. I ask my mother for advice. And I asked my mom, "Mom, what's a carbon removal?" And her first answer, and I know what you're all thinking, a tree. Trees, they capture carbon. They're great. We should plant more of them, and we should. But they're not just the solution to climate change. And I think that has been the problem when we think too often about carbon removals, about removing CO2 from the atmosphere and storing that permanently. So why is it that planting trees isn't just a solution? Well, we've tried it. We have a voluntary carbon market where we have offsets, where we plant trees with the promise of them absorbing CO2. They can offset our emissions from elsewhere. And we see this time and time again. Unfortunately, climate change has already having impacts on the Earth. It means that doing afforestation projects very often ends up with scenes like this and with headlines like that. And we need to think about carbon removals differently. We need to have a really basic, simple way of going about how we should deploy these solutions, because we do need them, because they play a role in net zero, a very large role. So how should we think about this? Well, I like to use this graphic very often. It's from my favorite NGO in Norway, of course, Bellona. They have a very simple way of thinking about it when we think about the carbon cycles. So on the right, you can see how we approach the land sink, right? It's a short carbon cycle. Trees grow, they absorb CO2, vegetation, then it dies, the CO2 is re-emitted. But then when we look on the left, it's a very different carbon cycle. And actually at the moment, most of it is only going one way up. It's taking CO2 out of the ground and leaving it in the atmosphere. We need to have a different solution when we think about how we take CO2 out of the atmosphere, because we have to close the carbon loop permanently. So what do we mean about this? Well, we need to start small. And indeed we have. This washing machine looking contraption here, that's a real device, right? We know direct air capture. And of course, that's not just where DAC is right now. Indeed, this is how we start small, but we need to go bigger. So it starts with research grants when we're thinking about policies. It starts with giving support to university graduates, to people not too much younger than myself, coming out of universities with big ideas and wanting to also use their experience and their knowledge to solve climate change. But then we got to go bigger, right? And we think of this plant in Iceland. Pretty much everybody, I think, has seen it at this point, except for myself. It's 4,000 tons per year. Everyone likes to say, oh, it's, 0.13 seconds of global emissions. It's nothing. Then we think about, oh, well, we're going a little bigger. We're getting a little more serious. This is 9 times bigger than the original plant in Orca. And then we get even bigger, right? And these aren't PowerPoints. These are actual pictures of projects that are being built or operating today. And this is a 1 million ton plant. So you can just look at the size of it. It's the size of apartment blocks that are here. And this is in Texas. So when we talk about policy, I always try to go back to the basics, right? When we're thinking about how we set the paradigm for this. Policy means, deploying capital. It means providing incentives, probably a lot of subsidies in the beginning, because it's going to be more expensive. It's going to be taking longer to deploy. Just like Northern Lights, it's a first-of-a-kind project. It is the first time that we've actually tried to do a project like this, and it's always going to be the most difficult one when you do it first. So we have to assist developers when we're thinking about this, but we need to step back, because when we're thinking about carbon removals, not CCS and reducing emissions, we have to make sure that the approach is correct from the beginning. How are we going to set this course? So in Europe, or in the EU, I should say, we have developed the first certification framework of its kind. It's a regulatory framework, so it's not leaving it to the private markets in an unregulated place, much like the Wild West. We tried to focus on a voluntary regulatory framework, i.e. voluntary in the sense that do you want to be subject to this, where we certify different types of removals, and that's the first key thing. We focus on permanent carbon removals, and by that we mean taking CO2 out of the atmosphere and storing it permanently underground. And we can see here the definition for this, and it means storing it securely and durably. And I think that's something important. I'm going to touch on that in a sec, of why that's very important, especially for the people in this room, to realize the advantage that you have when it comes to other carbon removal solutions. But we need to even think beyond just sort of definitions and legal terms. We need to think about how we approach our climate targets. So this really difficult to understand graph here is basically how we approach our emissions in Europe, right? This is designed by Carbon Gap, which is another fantastic NGO, but they've taken the data that comes from the Scientific Advisory Board, right, from a collective of European scientists who advise the EU institutions. And when we look here, you can see the Fit for 55, or that's sort of the 2030 targets where we set. And then we look to 2040, and we think, okay, you know, massive reductions there, but also we start to see much more removals that are coming into play. And then it continues on into 2050, and indeed beyond, it'll get even bigger, because there will be there is already too much CO2 in the atmosphere, and there will be even more amounts of CO2 in the atmosphere that we emit. So projects like Northern Lights, yes, they're great to start off by reducing emissions, but we need to emphasize this infrastructure is going to be absolutely key, not just for your generation or indeed mine, but future generations as well. But when we're thinking about these targets, are we getting them right? Because I see two different colors here of removals. We think, okay, biogenic removals, which come from the land sector, and geological removals, which come from a different sector. They come from storing CO2 in underground formations. And currently, when you think of the Commission and how they've designed the 2040 target communication, they've unfortunately lumped these two together. And I think that's the problem, is we need to start thinking about them separately. Going back to the graph I showed earlier from Bologna, different carbon cycles, different ways of storing CO2. And how do we, but how do we show this? With projects like Northern Lights, we need to also make policymakers understand that this is not just fancy charts on a screen. This is actually real projects that are doing this. Well, it starts with this, and I find this, when I look at graphs that show how geological storage works, this is my favorite one, because it shows what we mean, how deep we're talking, where that CO2 is actually going. But it means building trust. And I think that's something that I, as an environmentalist, have to be clear on, is, the oil and gas sector gets bashed quite regularly for its approaches to climate change, I think somewhat unfairly and somewhat fairly in some respects. But one thing is pretty clear, and I cannot emphasize this point more. There is no other industry on this planet that I want injecting CO2 into the ground, right? Because you guys know how to get carbon out of the ground, and you're damn no well how to put it back there forever. You've got all the resources, capital, but you've also got the people and the infrastructure, the equipment. You've got all the know-how to do it. So I would plead with you guys, and I'm sure you will, do it well, do it right, start with projects like Northern Lights, scale it all up, build that trust, because that's ultimately what we need in the future generations of how we approach carbon removals. Right here in Øygarden. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Very refreshing. Our next speaker is Matthew Kerner. He is a corporate vice president in Microsoft Cloud of Industry. And we will hear about Microsoft's investment in CCS and also the critical importance of digital tools in making CCS viable. And also about the voluntary carbon market. So welcome, Matthew Kerner.
Hello, everybody. I'm honored to be here on behalf of Microsoft. I'd love to thank our hosts from Northern Lights for putting on a wonderful program today. And of course, congratulations on this very exciting milestone of readiness to receive carbon. I do have some critical feedback, which was I was informed again and again that I would need to bring a raincoat, a winter hat, an umbrella, and it appears I should have packed sunglasses and sunscreen, so I will be better prepared next time for Øygarden. When I joined Microsoft in 2001 to work on Windows, we had a desktop operating system, and then we had recently introduced a new product, Windows Server, a server operating system. And in order to be competitive with that product, we had to optimize the Windows code-based performance for server scenarios. And in order to do that, we had to build a server performance lab where we could install Windows on many servers and validate its performance, test our optimizations. And there were some people who had a project, again, shortly before I joined, to tear out some offices from Building 26 where I sat and replace those offices with a server room like the ones you see in the movies, the raised floor, et cetera. And they did that. They had to overcome some challenges around the structural integrity of the building because it was designed to hold people, not servers. They were worried it would collapse on the underground parking garage. They also had to provide additional power and cooling to that room because, again, it had been designed to support some people, not these big racks of servers. And that server performance team did exceptional work, and Windows Server became a competitive product. And in fact, it became a category leader for years. And you could say in some ways that the success of Windows Server led to the establishment of our Microsoft Azure hyperscale cloud computing platform. In fact, when I joined Azure in 2009, I worked for a gentleman who had previously led the Windows Server performance team, and we were building the foundations of Azure. Now, you could take the Windows Server Performance Lab that I described before, and you could put it inside of any of our global Azure data centers today, and you could pack, let's say, dozens or hundreds of copies of that single lab in a single data center facility that we have in Azure. So we have an order of magnitude growth in our physical plant there. And over the course of the past year, Microsoft brought live 120 data centers, which is on average 1 new data center every 3 days. And we believe that this is the slowest pace of expansion that we will ever have. So, this is why it's very important for us to be focused on our net zero goals, because we have transformed from a company that was originally a people and knowledge company to being a company that's an asset-heavy company globally, and that comes along with Scope 3 emissions. So we've been working on this in many different dimensions over a long period of time, and we've made quite a bit of progress. I want to call your attention to a couple of different things. Sort of these sets of activities accrue towards some long-term goals. And the 2025 goal is quite important for us, and that is that we will have contracted for 100% green energy, meeting the energy needs of all of our buildings, campuses, and data centers globally by 2025, just a couple of months down the line. Now, in addition to that contractual and procurement side, we've done some work on the product side, and we've worked with a variety of partners to create hourly matching solutions. These are digital solutions that allow us as a customer and utilities who are generating power to report and verify on the per hour mix of energy sources that are generated and then the amount of energy that was consumed. In other words, we don't just say over a long period or over a month that the total amount of renewable energy netted out to what we needed to consume, but that we could look at it on an hour-by-hour basis. So you have the combination of a procurement vehicle, a power purchase agreement, and a digital solution like hourly matching. And by combining those two things together, we ensure not only that we have the right contractual framework, and not only do we as a client receive the service that we're paying for, but in fact, it enables the entire ecosystem to scale up capital investment because it requires the ability to meet this green power objective at every hour of every day, even if the sun is not shining or the wind is not blowing at that particular time. So whether it's additional green capacity or whether it's grid scale storage, whatever it may be, the capital investment and the procurement can lead to changes on the ground in terms of actual capital investments through this digital solution. Now, the other goal that I want to call your attention to is the very ambitious goal that we have set for 2050, where Microsoft will remove all historical emissions that we've generated since our founding in 1975. That is a tall order, and it is only possible with solutions like the one that you see here, because we need solutions that are not just net zero solutions, but are negative solutions. And so that's why, in particularly the BECCS scenario, we've contracted with Ørsted for over 3.5 million tons of CO2 removal over 10 years. We're certainly not done. In fact, we feel that the market doesn't have enough supply of this kind of product, which we would gladly purchase in order to meet that ambitious 2050 goal. So we come to the table in multiple ways to this project, and again, we're honored to be able to be a part of it. How do we come to the table? Well, I've described our interest as a buyer. We also come to the table as a technology partner. So we've partnered with Northern Lights to build a digital backbone to enable Northern Lights to track the life cycle of a carbon molecule from the point of capture through transport, storage in these tanks, and then permanent sequestration in subsea reservoirs. And in order to do that, we haven't just worked with Northern Lights, we have collaborated with an entire value chain of partners who bring assets and technology to the table using open standards like OPC UA to gather the data and reconcile the data and build a single view that shows that entire value chain. And it's a digital asset that we've created together and a repeatable asset. And in a sense, you could say, because all of these partners are working together on this, that Northern Lights has bootstrapped a new partner ecosystem for the carbon-free era. So we're quite excited about that. And we think that these digital solutions are essential for a couple of reasons. In order to scale beyond lighthouse projects, these solutions have to be profitable, and there has to be sort of a market-based way for people to find their way to these solutions and acquire them. And in order for those costs to go down, look, we're deeply grateful to the state of Norway and the EU for having the vision and conviction to bring the funding to bootstrap a lighthouse and for showing what's possible. And we think that digital solutions can help continue the next leg of the journey, because digital solutions enable a couple of things. They enable efficient operation, secure operation, compliant operation, and maybe most importantly, autonomous operation. And by having repeatable autonomous solutions, we think that costs can be taken out. As costs go down, prices can go down, and carbon sequestration can come into reach for many more organizations. And that, we believe, is how we're going to get to scale. As a buyer, it's very important to us that these solutions are high quality. And when we say high quality, it can mean a lot of things. But one basic thing that it means is when we talk to members of the public about what's going on, they feel good about it. And in addition to being high quality, we think they need to be verifiable. In other words, everybody ought to be able to trust in what actually happened. Again, that digital solution piece we think is very important. Common standards are also important. I mentioned OPC UA, which is a technical piece. There are other pieces that are going to describe how the solution works as a whole. And in order to have global acceptance, we really believe there need to be common standards. And finally, they need to come with new financial tools and market infrastructure that will enable the flow of funding required to scale this up. And by the way, we think there are digital solutions that need to come into play there as well. So I think congratulations are in order. I know from talking to many members of the Northern Lights team that all of you were on one career path and you picked yourselves up and moved over into this completely new space. And there's a lot of risk involved in that. And so I'm so grateful that you did it. And again, we're honored to be able to be a part of it. We think this is a very significant moment for the industry as a whole and perhaps for the world, you could say. And if I could just humbly suggest a call to action to this group. If you look at this facility and you imagine running it at the red line, in other words, you scale up the rate of sequestration to the absolute maximum threshold that the equipment and the reservoir can sustain, you then need to multiply it by 100 by 2030 to get to the carbon sequestration capacity that the EU requires in order to meet the Paris Accords. That is a tall order for all of us. Northern Lights has shown us that this is possible. And, you know, I talked before about the Server Performance Lab. That was a relatively small project at Microsoft. But I've had a front row seat to two very consequential sets of decisions. The first was to scale up Microsoft Azure before the business existed to build a hyperscale platform with massive CapEx spend. And I've also had a chance to watch Microsoft work through what it means to invest for this new era of AI. And you can see the billions, many billions of dollars of CapEx spend that we're making on a regular basis there too. And so what I would say is, we are committed to coming to the table as a buyer. We're committed to coming to the table as a technology partner. I hope that all of us can link arms and 100x this thing in the next 6 years to meet the goals for Norway, for Europe, and for the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to Matthew Koerner. The voluntary market is going to be the topic for the next panel now. As we heard, this market, it allows companies to buy and sell quotas, and it has expanded rapidly. So which actors are operating in this market, except from Microsoft? And also, what are their drivers? To discuss this, we have Ole Henrik Ree, Maximilian Brodin, Erik Rylander, and Benedicte Storebø. Benedicte, you work in Northern Lights, and despite us just hearing it now from Matthew as well, but I want to start this panel by just, if you could define what is the voluntary market?
Yes, so it's been mentioned already with regards to the targets that we have today, and in order to meet them, you need to have negative emissions. And carbon removal is a part of that. So by removing carbon from the atmosphere, this can come into a tradable credit. So for instance, through BECCS and DOCS, so just to be clear, for direct air capture, you capture CO2 from the air, you can liquefy it and store it in a permanent geological storage. And once it's stored, you would have to certainly deduct the emissions during the project, and you will have a negative emission, which is tradable. That can be traded either on a voluntary carbon platform. It can go between the capture facility and directly with a buyer, and it can also be offset within the carbon capture company. In terms of the voluntary part of it, nobody's forced to be in the voluntary carbon market. I'd say it's an initiative in order to reach the climate target on a voluntary basis.
Mm. We heard Matthew speaking about this, but Ole Henrik, could you tell us why exactly is Microsoft investing so much in this market?
So I think it's, for us, a license to operate, right? So we made this ambitious goal of spending a ton of money, of becoming, or actually removing all of our historical emissions. One would expect our shareholders to maybe sort of object to that. Why are you sort of spending your money on something that isn't generating new revenue? But actually the market really reacted positively to us taking that responsibility. And as has been said many times, it's no use being the world's biggest software company if the planet is burning.
Yeah, that's a good point. Erik Rylander from Stockholm Exergi. Could you tell us how important is the voluntary market for you, and what is your role in this?
So Stockholm Exergi, we are an energy utility operating in the Stockholm area, and we are now deploying a full-scale carbon removals project, a BECCS project, which will remove 800,000 tons of biogenic carbon dioxide on a yearly basis, storing it geologically, generating negative emissions or permanent carbon removals. And the part of the voluntary market in this, I think some of the speakers have already touched upon this. I mean, these projects are, first of all, first-of-a-kind projects, and they are expensive. There's lots of capex involved in it and high cost. So we need private and public money to cooperate in these projects. And there are government funds to be had. We already received grants from the European Innovation Fund in its first round, and we are also looking to get Swedish state aid. But the public money is not enough. So we also need the private money in the equation. And then we have, like Microsoft, we also signed a big contract with Microsoft and with the Frontier buyers, which is another leading buyer out on the market. So simply, these projects at this point at least are so costly that you need the private money and the market. But then for the first-of-a-kind projects, you also need the government subsidy to get the money in place to do the project. In the long term, this is going to be a fully market-based thing. You know, polluters pays principle. The ones who need the instruments will pay for them, and government aid will be phased out.
So this is a market not being part of the compliance market. And Maximilian Brodin, what is SEB's role in this?
It's a good question. It can be many things. So SEB is, for those of you who may not know SEB, it's a regional bank headquartered out of Sweden. We follow our clients globally, but we typically focus on home markets when we deploy capital. And our role in this, we look at this as a new sector that's going to be built. We got some numbers from Matthew, so it may be a staggering amount of money going into this in the next couple of years and beyond. That's obviously interesting for us. It's also the fact that you can think of it a little bit like the Norwegian oil and offshore sector, where regional banks take these assets, take them out in the world and show them to bring in capital. And we think of carbon as a commodity. It's an emerging asset class. Some would call it a commodity, others would call it a new asset class. It doesn't really matter. There's good prospects for carbon to be traded like any other commodity or any other financial derivative, which also makes it interesting for us. So I represent markets, the financial derivatives part of the bank, but I think there is good business for us as a bank in servicing this sector, both from deploying our own capital in the form of equity or debt, and from doing advisory services, and also from being part of trying to help scale this as a commodity that can be traded, which is, I think, where we're putting in the most of our effort right now.
And how exactly can you engage more buyers in this market?
Well, let's. Can I address the audience and do a little test? Is that fine?
Yep.
So we have some of our most esteemed political leaders here in the room today, and we have industry leaders. We have environmental organizations who are key to scale this market. How many buyers do we have in here? Yeah, Microsoft, but we know that. I mean, you're the buyer. We all look up to you. I saw 3 hands, and one was Microsoft. And I guess that's a little bit what we're trying to do. We're trying to engage with those who will be buyers eventually, because we've seen all these graphs. We've seen the hard-to-abate sectors presented by Claire, for example, and we know there are other sectors that will take the lead because they have lower emission intensity per dollar of revenue or something like that. But everyone has to be educated, and we need to create a little bit of sense of urgency that you need to go out there and buy now or commit to buying, take delivery in the future. Otherwise, there's not going to be a lot of financial or final investment decisions taken. So that's what we're trying to do right now. Small piece of the puzzle.
Ole Henrik.
I would like to add to that that we need to make this way simpler. Right now, it's too hard. So we as Microsoft have the muscles and financing to actually do it. But we sat down in a room along with Aker Carbon Capture and Ørsted back in the 10th of March in 2001, a group of companies just coming together, signing an MOU and agreeing, let's see if we can make this happen. But it took 2 years. And those 2 years before we come to the FID, a lot of that was spent of due diligence. And that's, I mean, not scalable. It's not something that we can continue doing. So we hope that, I mean, for us, going out into a liquid market and just buying these credits obviously would be the best scenario. But right now we're willing to put in the work, but it needs to become much, much, much simpler.
Mm. And how much of the market have you already bought? Is it 70%, 80%?
Well, in terms of being a purchaser, we're at 80-something% according to CDR.fy, so Robert tracks it. But yeah, super happy to see others coming along, like Equinor announcing 550,000 tons. That's super. So my worry is that there is a lot of companies out there that have made net zero pledges, and a lot of them have goals by 2030, and I don't think they realize that they cannot come in Q2 2029 and say, we want to buy a lot of credits, because they need to get on board now.
Mm.
So what price are you going to charge them if they come then? Because you have all the credits. So.
Yeah.
Erik Rylander. You were nodding. It's too late to come into the market in a few years' time.
For buyers, yes.
Yep.
Absolutely. I mean, we need the buyers already now in order to scale this industry in time for their climate targets. So this is very important. This is also very important for organizations like SBTi to acknowledge this fact that, you know, we cannot wait with the removals until net zero day. We need to scale the industry. We need to have a target trajectory also for removals, not only for reductions. We need them both, right? But a clear message from, you know, we already have a clear message from Microsoft as a buyer, and we need more buyers. But we also need the organizations that support the buyers, like the SBTi, to show guidance. You know? So what are the responsible companies supposed to do? How are they supposed to go about this? Because just like you mentioned, I mean, Microsoft has the money to you know, do huge due diligence processes. I mean, we've been in one of them, so we know. But all companies don't. So there needs to be organizations that help companies with this, like the Zero Emission Platform, but also SBTi, you know, they show the map to net zero. So they also need to show not only where net zero is, but also how to get there from a removals perspective.
But I think that's also coming, hopefully.
It is coming.
A bit more guidance, which is very promising. But for right now, this is something we have to do ourselves. There are quite a few standards out there in the voluntary carbon market. And with the project that we have together with SLB Capturi, just to name it correctly, Ørsted and Microsoft, we've gone together in that value chain in order to register the Ørsted volumes from the Kalundborg hub to get them certified and verified for amongst Microsoft to purchase, which is something we are navigating through, in addition to developing those methodologies through the CCS Plus initiative on a global basis. So from this year, CF, I'm full speed ahead, please.
Maximilian, you are head of commodities, meaning you are trying to engage buyers in the market. And my question is it difficult to sell a rather complex product, if it's possible to say that?
Yeah. It's the most difficult thing I've ever tried to sell. And I've traded about 150 different commodities in my career. Most of those are established markets. This is much harder, especially it takes a lot of time. So we kind of look after, pretentious to say that, but we try to look after the European industry, especially, because Seb from HSBC explained this actually earlier, that the bank's own footprint or emissions, they're measured on how they deploy capital to their clients. So in order for SEB to succeed with our net zero target, we need our clients to succeed. So we actually really want them to be first movers. We would like them to be more like you. They're not. And we need to work with them from telling them what a CDR is all the way to submitting formal documentation to the board for approval for a policy. It's like having a treasury policy. They need a policy in place to start buying. And that takes a lot of time. So it's not impossible. And I think we made a lot of progress since we started. But having engaged deeply with maybe 200 large corporates, especially in Europe, we have maybe 10 to 15 that we hope will be converted to buyers this year. And I'm always a little bit optimistic. Otherwise, I probably would be doing something else.
I think everyone here is.
Yeah.
And looking to the future, I mean, how do all of you see the development of the voluntary market, Erik?
Well, first of all, I think that we are going to see a compliance market in parallel to the voluntary market. I mean, at least in Europe, we know that the Commission is going to come with a proposal in 26 for how to include removals into the ETS with possible implementation after 2030. That will obviously reveal a much bigger market compared to what we see today. I also think that there will be a voluntary market in parallel because there are companies like Microsoft and others that have much higher ambition than the politicians. So they will buy on top on their compliance. But exactly how that is going to look like, I don't know. But for sure, at this point, the voluntary market from a buyer perspective is perhaps not developing at the speed we need to build the removals industry to a scale which corresponds to the climate targets that we see out there.
Maximilian, your response to that, or what is your perspective to that?
Well, I think hopefully we can get a bit of a hockey stick effect here eventually. The thing is, there's a good business case to start buying right now, basically because no one else is. It's like the contrarian view of how you trade things, right? If no one's buying it, no one's going to supply it, and then the price is going to go up. Now people say the price is too high, it's too expensive. We look at these analysis saying that the price will be lower in 2050 and so on. They're all built on some assumptions on how this is scaled. We're lagging behind massively right now. Those analyses, they're going to be changed. And I think if you enter into something now, and we're talking about taking delivery in 5, 10, 15 years' time, there's huge optionality to trade out of these products as well during that time period. You get that for free. There's even no credit risk in most of these contracts without diving into details. You basically just commit to take delivery in future, given that they actually manage to produce this. If it's you guys in Stockholm, for example, how can that not be attractive? Well, it's not in the nature of corporates to take those kind of bets, really. And it's not in the nature of investors to go into a market where the industry is not already trading. There's never been a commodity market that was, where the liquidity came in from the hedge fund community or asset managers before the industry engaged. So when it happens, it can move quick. That's the positive thing.
And I just want to add to that. I mean, I totally agree with you. I know now is an opportunity because there are projects out there, coming to the market with these instruments. So for buyers that are ready to act now, there is a window of opportunity. Now you can secure your removals for your future net zero position at the predictable price, because we are out there selling at a price which is fixed.
It's not only, sorry to just jump in, but it's not only predictable, it's heavily subsidized. So you get to buy something for maybe 50% of the price of producing it before cost overruns and delays and all that. It's a great first mover advantage. And I mean, I know you're doing this for many other reasons, but I think you're also running a pretty good business here.
Yeah, and Ole Henrik, how can you have a lot of market power. How can you use this in the future? How will you use it in the future?
Well, I'm certain that we're not going to use it to bump up prices for certain. So we're certainly trying to make it simpler. We're willing to take that first mover role and actually do this the right way. I think the industry is at a pretty pivotal point when it comes to removals, because although there is a lot of sort of will to get things moving now, I think what's been talked about earlier today about the timing of the value chain is so important. I think that's why we made the Ørsted project work, because we actually sat together in a room and agreed this is what we want to do, and then the timeline kind of follow that. But the danger right now is the public perception as well. So we're trying to tell the public that we are doing carbon dioxide removals, whether it's through DACs or BECCS or whatever. It needs to be super bulletproof. We need to get it right now, because one of these projects failing would be so horrible for the industry. So we're seeing a lot of pushbacks in markets like the UK, where the biomass feedstock is under constant scrutiny. So getting it right now is actually almost as important as moving in the right speed, I would say.
And just lastly, do any of you see any need for regulations in the future in the market? Everyone is nodding. Maximilian?
Obviously, it helps if it's regulated. And I think in the US, SEC has put it under supervision of CFTC. That's really good. There's news coming out there as recently as last week. In Europe, we got the CRCF coming. We got the CCS directive that also plays in here, actually, with less liability for buyers of the CDRs. So I'm not so worried about that. It's super important, but we see it coming, and the sooner the better. And then also, if it's regulation or if it's something else, but more transparency around sort of how you can claim your net zero under the SBTi, for example. That's really key. We think we're moving in the right direction as well.
How do you see it, Benedicte?
Yeah, so the transparency is crucial. It needs to be reliable, and as Ole-Henrik said, if we need to show the world that we can make this work now. So what we do on our side until I guess we have more regulations tied to it to build even more trust for those involved in the value chain, but also for those outside, is the educational part of it, with the experience we have from a subsurface perspective, for instance. For us in general, the CO2 is treated equally regardless. It's measured, reported, equipment is calibrated. Yep.
Yeah, I just when it comes to the regulatory perspective, I just want to highlight the importance of the Green Claims Directive in a European context, because you know, if we want to have the market with us or the corporations with us on this, there needs to be clear rules on how you can claim what you have bought. You know, if you buy a certificate for a permanent removal, it needs to be clear what you can do with it. And that is going to be decided in the trilogue pretty soon, at least in its first version. This must come out right. If it doesn't, it will be governments alone. Because if it comes out in a way that corporates cannot use these instruments, I don't think it will, because it has been worked with. But it was not looking good in the start. So this is so instrumental. It's not only about getting the subsidies in place, it's also about getting the market rules in place that allow the companies to participate. So work on it from both ends. I think it will come out good, but just to highlight the importance of, you know, what can you say that you have achieved?
Thank you very much to all of you. Erik Rylander, Benedicte Storebø, Maximilian Brodin, and Ole-Henrik Ree. So today we have heard perspectives from many parts of the value chain. Now we will invite Northern Lights owners on stage. The three energy companies partnered on Northern Lights projects back in 2017 and have paved the way for commercial CCS. So please welcome now on stage Arnaud Le Foll from Total Energies, Bernard Koudelka from Shell, and Grete Tveit from Equinor. So each of you will now give your perspective on how we can enable a market for commercial CO2 transport and storage, and we'll start with you, Le Foll.
Thank you. First, I would say that I concur with pretty much everything what was said all over the day from the customers, government side, on what is required. I'll try to give a perspective from an investor coming from the oil and gas, what we think could help go further. Actually, three elements. First element, if we want to drive the cost down, standardization is quite powerful. Which means in this emerging industry, agreeing on what is a CO2 specification will be really useful. Today, we have projects in the US, in the North Sea, in Malaysia, and we can see that it's quite widespread in terms of diverse specification. It's a matter as well of integration with the customers and the technologies that they deploy on their own site. So then we have a system that is intercompatible. So CO2 specification is one. Second one is about long-term liabilities. Here again, different regimes for different geographies. Some elements have to be still clarified. I think it deserves a discussion because, of course, for private investors, having unlimited liabilities over a very long period of time is not really bankable from us and from our investors. And so here, how you share this risk and liabilities with the customers, with the governments and ourselves, still deserve to be matured further so that you attract more investors in the storage part. Now, one example here. If you capture CO2 in Denmark and you store it in Norway, if there is a leak in Norway, is it the CO2 of Denmark or the CO2 of Norway? And this is not resolved. And the third element is, there has been a boom, and I think now is going a bit down, but many governments, and Norway the first, have been putting on the market licenses for exploration for new storages. And they've been pushing that with a request that we do like we did in the oil and gas industry, meaning drilling a well very quickly to assess the structure. But I can see here two differences with the oil and gas. One, first, the market is not there. So drilling a well now for a project that will be delivered only post-2030 is a poor utilization of our capital in the oil and gas industry. And so, you cannot ask us to drill a well in the 2 coming years for something we'll build only in 10 years' time. The second element is that it's actually way cheaper to drill a well to explore for oil and gas than to explore for carbon storage because of the tax regime. So actually today we are facing authorities which are asking us, take a create, but drill a well, very expensive one, and maybe you will make money, more than 10 years from now. And that cannot work. And I think here as well, it deserves a discussion so that the approach for those bid rounds, around carbon storage might be maybe a bit different. We are the same players as oil and gas, but this has to be played with different rules.
Thank you very much. And next, Bernard Kudelka.
Yeah, so first of all, congratulations on the milestone. Tim Bore, great job, and the team of getting us to this point. I'm really proud to stand here as an owner and co-investor and having achieved this milestone. So it's great to be here to start with. Now, what does it take to scale the industry? And we run the risk of repeating ourselves because I think a lot has been mentioned during the afternoon. But I think we all agree that it needs to scale. It needs to scale to hit the climate ambitions that we have and to get us to a net zero energy system by 2050. And 8 gigatons were mentioned today. Depending on what scenarios you read, that number differs slightly, but it is in the gigatons. And it will require private capital to flow into this. It can't be funded by governments or subsidies. So what does it take? And I think for me, there's 3 things. One is public acceptance. Second one is a business model that works. And thirdly, you need to have stable and conducive government regulation and policies to enable CCS. So let me kind of unpack this a little bit, right? So public acceptance, we heard the notion of building trust, but I think it's the collective in this room that we need to establish that CCS is indeed a safe, reliable way to permanently store carbon. And we need to demonstrate it, but we also need to externalize it in our stakeholder communities. That's number one for me. The second one is business models. And Arnaud has already unpacked a few things. But so we need, of course, efficient carbon pricing in our economies to create incentives for CCS. We need to find solutions for cross risks along the value chain. We heard this before, that these are novel, long value chains with significant risks along a very long capital cycle of almost 50 years. And we need solutions to actually cover that risk. And at the moment, we don't have insurance products. We don't have anything in the market that helps us cover some of that risk, which makes the synchronization of storage providers and emitters a difficult one. We also need to have good carbon accounting, as we mentioned earlier. I think customers need to have the ability to verify the carbon molecules all the way from their sources to when they're stored. And only then we can really drive voluntary markets and other green premiums in the products that we want to sell. And then on the regulatory side, there's a number of things in there. One, of course, we need to have regulations that are clear, that don't disadvantage first movers. And I talk about licensing, standards, specification, monitoring requirements, post-closure liabilities. So there's a number of regulations that need to emerge and they need to actually support the CCS industry. We also need to have stable regulatory environments. And even if I look to Europe, whilst we have a very clear plan now, the regulations are still emerging, which makes it hard to be an investor in that space. And of course, we need to have cross-border movements. The last thing I would say, in the short term, what we also need is infrastructure has been mentioned. So large scale and particular cross-country infrastructure is a real bottleneck at the moment. And that's where governance need to step in and play a role. And we need to have more incentives, both on the emitter side as well as on the transport and storage side, to get these early projects off the ground. Because I think once we have a number of projects up and running, customers and transport and storage providers will be more freely in their engagements, and it will be easier to find commercial solutions.
Thank you very much. And then lastly, Grete Tveit.
Well, let me first open with say this is a fantastic day. I've been looking so much forward to this day for many, many years now, and congratulations to us all for actually achieving this opening ceremony here. It's fantastic. And it is, I think, what we are witnessing here today is probably the first step in a cross-border economical CCS value chain. Fantastic. Then to the question that these two gentlemen have answered so well, and maybe trying to fill in a little bit, because we want to grow this business. We can't stop here. And to grow this, I think commercially, we need a lot of policies. And we have policies in place. We might need more. But let me focus on how do we make this commercial? Well, there are various policies in place. We have one thing that could make it commercial, and that is, of course, that the cost of emitting is higher than the cost of capturing and storing. That is one thing. The other thing is, okay, we can have funding in place that covers the cost of this, or a combination of these two. And I think in Europe today, we have the EU ETS, but we also have the Innovation Fund and similar. So here it is a combination. In US, we have the Inflation Reduction Act that actually compensate us for capturing and storing the CO2. And in Norway, we already had for Sleipner a commercial solution to do CCS in 1996. So that is actually something that works. One more thing that can help this work is, of course, what has been mentioned earlier today as well, is that we find the customers that are willing to pay the extra premium for the clean product. And Heidelberg Cement, our first customer in Northern Lights. I guess you have found such a customer as well, and congratulations to you, because I think that is a very good achievement and a good example that I hope will grow. So that is to the government and to the authorities for the policies, and thank you for joining us here today. You are very important for the growth of this business. So to the industry, because we can just sit there relaxing, we have to do our bit as well. And it has mentioned a lot here. Maybe to add to this, we need to get the costs down. And there are several ways of doing it, and standardization is one, as is mentioned. Efficiency is another one, and also to grow the scale to get down the cost per ton that we will store. So in addition to that, now in the beginning and in the early years, we need funding support. And funding support, what is that? Well, that is actually taxpayers' money. So for us, as representing 3 oil and gas companies, let's be a little bit more modest when it comes to the internal rate of return that we expect out of these projects, and not compare it to a normal oil and gas development. Then my last thing that I will mention is, if we don't collaborate across ourselves and with those who want to capture the CO2 and those who want to transport it and those who actually want to sell their clean products, we will not succeed. So collaboration across the industry is extremely important. In addition to that, the collaboration between the industry and the government to have the right policies in place and the right speed, I think also is extremely important. So I just want to end by saying congratulations to us all, and a big thank you to Sverre Overå and team who made this possible and developed this great infrastructure, and to the Norwegian government to actually put in place funding mechanism across the entire value chain so that we could take FID on the same time and actually make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the 3 of you. We have a few minutes left, but they are also very crucial. Our next guest is Anders Opedal. He is CEO in Equinor and has followed the project closely from various positions in Equinor. And he will share his perspective on what it takes what it will take to move forward with CCS in energy transition. Welcome, Anders Opedal.
Thank you very much, and Minister, colleagues, and friends. It's really nice to be back here at Øygarden, and especially today. I've been looking forward to this day for many, many years. And when I look outside, it's really, really fantastic to see this facility. So congratulations to everyone. And when I look at this facility, it reminds me a little bit about my hometown, Sauda, which is a small industrial place between Bergen and Stavanger. In Sauda, you can see pipes coming down from the mountains and go straight to the hydropower plant. And next to the hydropower plant is the factory, the smelter. So everything in Sauda is surrounded, is really circled around energy. And it's actually access to energy that defines a small city like Sauda, which is similar in many, many also industrial places and towns in Europe and elsewhere. And today is a very important day. And I guess the beauty of being almost last at the seminar, that everything that I'm going to say has been said many times. But I think on such an important day as today, it's worth repeating some of the key messages. But this is actually, as you know, a significant milestone, not only for Øygarden, but also for the CCS community as such. And now, one of the key technology to move towards net zero is not only on PowerPoints, it's actually, we can see it outside the window, and that is worth celebrated. So it's important for Øygarden, I think it's important for Norway, and for Equinor as one of the three owners. So also thank you to the other two owners. But it's also important for people. It's important for jobs and local communities. And actually in Europe, it is 3 to 4 million people that works across industry where emissions are hard to abate, like steel, concrete, and chemicals. And behind this large number, we see cornerstone workplaces, families, and local communities. And some of them are not as lucky as we were in Sauda with access to clean hydropower. So some of them depend on the ability to decarbonize their production. I would also, like Grete just said, thank everyone involved in the Northern Light project. And to me, as a former project director, more than 3 million hours have been worked with no serious incidents. That is fantastic, and I just want to give, make sure that the project a round of applause on that one. And equally, and almost equally important, is to complete a complex and groundbreaking project like this on time and on cost, especially in the context of the inflation we are seeing. This was also during COVID, and we see cost increases and value chain bottlenecks around the world that impacts all parts of the energy industry for the time being. But here, it was able to do it on cost, on time. Fantastic. It's a one of a kind, actually. Some of the most important people that have worked on completing the facility, they have been gathered in a tent besides this house. I met them earlier today and really thanked them for their work, dedication, and deliveries. I call them the CCS pioneers. The Northern Light project is a result of a political ambition to develop a full-scale CCS value chain in Norway. And the state support for both capture and transport and storage has, as you know, made this project possible. So I would like to thank politicians from different governments for their support, today represented by the two most important, Tina Bru and Terje Aasland. And with this leadership, Norway is in the forefront. Internationally, on the other hand, as you all know, this debate around CCS has been challenging for many years. But luckily, we are seeing very positive trends. Germany announced earlier this year that they're coming up with CCS. Denmark is moving fast with their CCS licensing rounds. And the UK stays committed to CCS as one of the ways to decarbonize the industrial areas. And as Equinor, we would like to be in all of these markets. The energy perspectives, Equinor's global energy market outlook, suggests that the world will require between 3 to 5 gigatons of CCS annually by 2050. So 1.5 million is a start. But we need to do more, so rapid scale of CCS capacity is urgently required. We believe that the profitability and the competitiveness of CCS will strengthen, CO2 prices will increase, technology and infrastructure will develop, and scale will come. It was very well said in the previous sessions. We will create value for Equinor and our shareholders using the competitive advantage we do have. And Equinor's CCS portfolio will continue to grow. Later this year, we hope to FID 2 projects in the UK, the Northern Endurance Partnership and the Net Zero Teesside. We are continuing to mature the expansion of Northern Lights, as you know, and we are impatient in taking the final investment decision for this. Our future energy system must be built on profitable projects. To pick up speed in bringing CCS forward, we must make the market work. It's really a simple equation. It must be cheaper to store CO2 safely and permanently underground than allowing it to be let out in the atmosphere. On the customer side, we need to secure the demand for CO2 transportation and storage. Until costs come down, there will be a need for public financial support and incentives for customers who want to capture CO2 and use our storages. We need effective processes allocating sufficient storage capacity, and we need CO2 storage licenses to plan infrastructure and to develop the market. To pick up speed, governments and industry must continue to work together. And in that respect, Northern Lights really stands out as a guiding star for other projects. The trust and the cooperation, the stable framework, shared goals, and the will to risk sharing made Northern Lights possible. And it's hard for me to even imagine what my hometown in Sauda had been without the factory, as probably it is in Lengfurt in Germany, home of a large cement factory, or in Brevik, who will soon be able to store the CO2 in Northern Lights. To succeed with the energy transition has never been more important, but has never been more difficult. It's easy to get caught up in the challenges. They are real, and they need to be addressed. At the same time, things are moving at a greater scale and a faster pace than even before. So there are reasons for optimism because things are really happening, as we have seen here in Øygarden today. So it's a real reason to celebrate, and again, congratulations to you all.
Thank you so much to Anders Opedal. We are reaching the end of the summit. I also want to say thank you very much on my behalf, and it's really been a privilege to share these hours with all of you at this historical event. And Northern Lights is a guiding star, as Anders Opedal said. So thank you.
Good. So I want to also thank you, Marouk. It was a very busy program, so I think you exceptionally did very well guiding us through this.